Hey, everybody, welcome to Hope Illuminated. This is the place where we share powerful stories, science, and well being strategies. Isolation and despair can be defeated, and a passion for living rekindled. No flashlight required for our journey, just fired up listeners ready to engage with our international experts, and today's no exception. I'm really excited to bring to you our guest, John Brown. He is a former Apple leader turned therapist, and he's here to share some things about high performance environments and push to perform contexts and what that does to mental health. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sally. Great to be here with you today.
Yes. So I was one of those kids that chased a lot of carrots. I was probably conditioned from a lot of things, but also hardwired to do this. And it was very interesting for a long period of time to kind of identify myself with what I did. And this is where you spent a lot of your time. So let's start by just talking a little bit about your story. What were some of the things that you went through that have led you to focus on this topic?
My story starts in Akron, Ohio, where, small little town, that got put on the map, by these days, LeBron James. And that's all we're known for these days. But we're bigger than that. We're outside of Cleveland, and I love it there. But it was interesting. I say it started there because that was actually when I was coming through elementary school. We got our first Apple IIe. And back then I became the president of our computer club, and that's when I knew these machines were just magical and Apple was just amazing.
Mm.
And so that was my carrot early on. I was like, I got to work for these people. I don't know what they do, how they do it, but this thing is amazing. And go long story short, jumped to college at Miami University. And when I came out, I knew I wasn't going to return to Ohio. It was about, seeing the world and going off and doing different things. And it came back to Apple, and I said, I got to find out how to wait for this, folks. And it was fascinating because that was the days you had to send out letters,
Hmm.
to get a
With a
job.
stamp.
Yes, with a
Yes.
stamp. Yes, yeah. I sent one off to Apple, and I was rejected. With sorry, you don't have a master's. We only hire people with master's degree. I was dejected. Really quickly. Of that's my dream. And strangely enough, it took me to another path to Dell, and which at that point in time, Dell was just
Hmm.
starting out and had no clue who they were, but it was a job. You know how that is. When you're coming out of college, it was like, I just need a job. So I moved to Texas, and I learned early on, I was a research competitive analyst then, and I had a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to say, and no one would listen, but they would listen to all these people on the outside of the company. And
Mm.
that's when I started realizing, huh, you have to create your own brand, and because you're just an employee. And so I was there for a
Mm.
number of years, and that's when I knew I got to start creating who is John Brown. And so I went
Mm.
off to the analyst side of the world with the whole intent of let me try and help people understand what I know in my knowledge. And took me an amazing way of seeing the world, talking to execs, around the world in tech, giving my advice, guidance on how to kind of navigate tech. And that by that point, that's when Apple was starting to crash and burn, and everyone was fleeing. And
Mm.
that's when I got burned out, traveling around, and I wanted to kind of settle down. And I knocked on the doors at Apple, and people were saying, "Why are you running into a burning building?" Yeah,
Right.
it didn't make sense. But Steve had come back, the year before, and
What year is
I
this
heard
approximately?
this was right at 99. Yeah,
Mm.
1999 was approximately then. And I heard his keynote on the initial iMac, and that's when I was sold that
Mm.
I see the vision with you. Drank the Kool-Aid, and by 2000, I jumped on board, and that's kind of where my Apple story started.
Well, that's definitely a story about perseverance, and I love that. In the middle of that, you're like, wait, wait, wait. My voice is just equally as intelligent and guiding as everybody else, but I'm inside. Let me go outside for a little bit and develop, the strength in that from the receiver's perspective, and then I'll be better prepared to do the work. Who am I, and what is my brand, and what do I have to offer? That's pretty significant self-reflection for such an early part of your career. Served you
It was
well.
hard. It was
Mm.
hard because, when I was at Dell and people weren't listening to my thoughts, I, came as a young, college person ready to take on the world. And then I got humbled really quickly that you know nothing. And that was hard because that's when you're like, well, how am I supposed to have a career if they don't believe me or listen to me?
Mm,
So
hmm.
it took a lot of dejection of feeling down and kind of, and that's when I really had to start to kind of think about, well, how does this work? How does this system work? And there's systems all around us, and we have to try and understand them to figure out how to succeed in them. And that's kind of didn't know what I was doing at the time, but as I got older, I started reflecting. That's what I've been doing for quite a while. Understand the system so I can figure out how to navigate it.
Yes. That is a humbling journey for all of us because we're like, why am I not just flourishing on my own? Well, because you're part of a ecosystem. And the
Yes,
ecosystem is norms and cultures and ways of doing things that if you don't fit, it's going to be hard for you to flourish, even if you're really smart, and really driven. So that's a
exactly.
career learned lesson over and over again. Well, take us to the next chapter. So back at Apple and you're doing stuff. What happens next?
So there was a early moment where I had my vision of what success here would look like, and that was going to be being a product manager, being one of the ones behind to say that
Mm,
you're the guy that put it on the shelf. And
right.
and from my mind, I figured I had all the tools. I'm here. You're going to grow inside, and they're going to be able to allow you to do that. So there was a product leader that I had grown close to. Thought he was potentially going to be a potential mentor. He was in leadership, and so one day I just went straight up to him, had a one-on-one with him, and asked him, like, how do I become a product manager? Because that was my vision of success. And he point blank told me, "You're not." And I was like, "Come again?"
What?
How do you know I can't be that? But it's like, we don't do it that way. We bring someone outside that already has done it, and you haven't
Oh,
done it.
how defeating.
So it was, not only was it defeating that what I saw as success was taken from me by the company deciding on its own, but then also kind of hurt that this person that I respected and a big leader at Apple had basically said, "I don't believe in you."
Mm,
As the other way that I, processed it, and that's when I learned that you I can choose at this point to let them create the narrative about me, or
hmm.
I had to create the narrative of what success was for
Mm.
me. And so that's when I started learning how to narrate my own story. I couldn't call him Morgan Freeman to narrate my story, but it was about how am I going to see myself and how am I going to actually say success is happening for me? Because if I left it up to them, it was always going to be a deduction because what I wanted and what they wanted were not always going to be aligned. And that was going to, I can't lean on that as my measure of success and fulfillment.
Narrative therapy, right? So there's this piece of narrative psychology that you get to reclaim the parts of the story that are yours and reject the ones that are not. And so you can say, yeah, that fits with how I see myself. That is the narrative of my life. And you, I don't know. That one doesn't. So I reject it, and then it's a conscious and intentional effort about what you get to weave into your story of self. And I
Hmm.
think that was a very healthy thing to do at that point in time that felt so discouraging.
Well, and it also happened around the time, we're old enough that we probably remember there was the first iteration of .com and it
Mm.
busted. Yeah, and so
Hmm.
this is about 2 years into my journey at Apple, and I saw plenty of friends having to leave the
Hmm.
bay, because they were cut. The
Yep.
pink slips came and they were out of there, and so this in this conversation with this leader had happened. This was going on in the community around me, and that's where I started looking holistically at my story, and I said I need to start thinking about what am I going to do after this because this is real. If it happened to them, why wouldn't it happen to me?
Mm.
And so what is part of my story? And part of it was always as early as middle school and high school of helping people. And so I never had a desire to go back for an MBA because I always felt personally that it was what I was supposed to do, not, in order to kind of succeed, you had to have this MBA, but it wasn't in my heart, what I wanted to do. And so when this .com bust happened, I started planning for future after Apple. And I went back for
Mm.
my master's in counseling psychology because I had always loved helping people. And I knew one day I wanted to be a therapist and help people navigate life. And so that was part of my new story was I'm not going to just lean in on depending on a company
That's
to
right.
tell me whether I was going to be successful or not. I'm going to write the story. And that's, started my journey of Apple in the daytime, therapist in the evening for over 20 years.
20 years. Two very demanding things. How did you sustain yourself doing all that?
Well, first and foremost, I have a wife that was incredible in the journey, which, always go unsaid is that a lot of folks have people behind them that keep them going, keep them moving. And she was my rock, and still is,
Hmm.
because we also got married my first year at Apple. So she's been on the journey the entire, way. Um, but it was fascinating in the daytime because I had this path that I was doing in the evening. I actually gained more freedom at work because I knew
Hmm.
who I was and where I was going to be,
Yep.
regardless of Apple. So it gave me more freedom to actually be more of my own voice at the office, to take more risk, to push,
Yep.
in my brand development and relationships and because what else could they do? They could
Hmm.
fire me and I would go on into my other life. And so it
Yep.
gave me freedom because I chose to kind of create a bigger story than just the Apple story. And so that was really incredible because I actually enjoyed the Apple journey even more because I could be myself a lot more.
Mm.
And then in the evenings when I would go down and help folks in my therapist office, as draining as you could be from a tech job, it actually gave me life because I could see impact I was having on people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and being able to help them navigate was like refreshing when you get home at 11 o'clock at night and you're like, wow, I left the day with someone feeling that they can succeed for themselves, later in that evening. So
So
they
even
they
though it was
fed each
work,
other. They
yes,
they both
your
fed
cup
each
got
other.
filled. Yes, very
Yeah.
cool. And I love the part where you said you got freedom from planning for the what is after the X, because I think that is something that's a transferable message for all of us. What's happening after my kids empty nest me? What's happening after I'm no longer a college athlete? What's happening when I retire? Like planning for that and thinking about what does a fully engaged, meaningful life look in those spaces, again, frees you from just being defined by who you are right now. Um, and
And
very
usually that
emotionally
becomes
healthy.
hard to do because our identity gets sucked into one path. And Let's be fair, we spend what 90+% of our life in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So it's logical for us to be identified as work. But when everything is focused on that's who I am because it's the one lane I can see, you struggle because when that
Mm-hmm.
moves up, you go up. When that moves down, you go down. And so when you can expand the sphere of life to see that you have identity in so many other aspects as a husband, a wife, as a friend, a best friend, as a caregiver to my parents, to that you have these other identities, you don't bounce up and down as frequently because they actually
Mm.
balance each other out. As one is kind of bumpy, something else is actually usually going good. And you can see
Right.
it when you expand your sphere of living, versus very myopic of I am my job. You your job is a part of you versus who you are.
Yes, and I think the trap, maybe the lure, I'm not sure which word I want to use here, is that for, exceptional high performers in push to perform environments, there's just never enough. There's never enough training. There's never enough
Mhm.
preparation. There's never enough sales. There's never enough fill in the blank. You are striving for ever moving goalposts. And so the time and the energy and the focus all get sucked up into the next whatever, promotion,
Mhm.
record, whatever. And so there just seems to be less and less time and energy to focus on, I call them eggs in the basket. If you have a basket full of eggs, and they're all around one identity, and someone drops that basket, you are lost. But if you've got multiple baskets with multiple eggs and someone drops one basket, you have all the other baskets, and they keep you
Exactly.
going, and you have a time and energy to refill the one you dropped. Um, but yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. So talk a little bit about when you decided to go full time into the therapy realm. Was there a turning point for you where you were like, yep, it's time for me to follow this path?
There was, so another transition happened, in my Apple career. Uh, my you boss for many years had decided to retire, and initially I was part of a succession plan, and his leader decided to go in a different route, and so that left me wondering, well, what's next? And that's where I started to lean into, remember, you had a plan. I could, while there's frustration, anger, hurt of not going down a path that you had planned for, internally in the workplace, there's still was another plan for me. And I reset and saw that. And part of that was I love Apple. Apple has been basically all of my adult life. And so
Mm,
before I left, I knew there was still unfinished business, and that was helping the others, coming behind me to be able to succeed in and carry on the torch of what Apple is. And so I actually created a new role for myself, out of the ashes of that despair. I decided I was going to create, Apple's first mentoring program, and to be
mm,
able to help those who have potentially are on the same journey that I had to navigate, the ups and downs, the being seen, not being seen, and so on. And so I went out, created a deck, and started shopping around to some of our execs, leaders, and finally one bit and said, we need this. And so, it was funny. I was actually on vacation in Asia, and I get a call, saying, "Can you come in on Monday? We want to talk to you about your idea." And I was like, "Okay, sure. Yeah, why not? Another meeting. Yeah, I have this meeting on Monday, and we want you to do that. We love that you start tomorrow." I'm like, "Whoa." Like,
ah,
like, so I get in the car and I call my wife and I tell her, like, I think I just changed jobs, and and so it's fascinating, but it gave me, understanding that you can create your path even when it looks like there's a big crater in front of you.
Mhm.
And a lot of us don't realize the power we actually have to create. We just let someone else create something, and do we fit what they created? But if
Right.
you can see
Right.
the power that you have to actually create, you'll be amazed how many people are waiting for you.
Hmm.
And so that opened the door to another 3 years at Apple. That, to this day it is thriving. It is reaching
Oh,
over 160,000 employees. Trying to have mentors to be able to guide them through their career. But it was also a transition into my next career, because it gave me, practice reps, as they say, in mentoring and coaching, and how to
mhm.
design thinking around, navigating careers before I went off into my full-time, gig now as a therapist, executive coach, and sports psychologist.
Yeah, I think the employee resource groups, the mentoring, and the career coaching pieces that are, I would say, more acceptable and more commonplace today are 100% also mental health programs,
Yes,
but in a little easier to digest clothing,
exactly.
because it really does help people through very difficult times in their career. But it also there's a holistic place for them. There's safety to be vulnerable, and it's not going to come back and bite you. It's a really good overlapping business
Mm-hmm.
strategy and mental health strategy, and I'm a huge fan of all mentoring
Oh, I'm glad you
programs.
mentioned that, because I actually added my executive coaching on for that,
Uh-huh.
very reason, because
Right.
most people don't come to a therapist until they feel the wheels are falling off.
Off.
Yeah.
Done.
But
Crash and burn.
yeah, you're at that point. I now need help, and I need it quickly. But they will
Right.
see an executive coach so far earlier in life, because they feel like, oh, you're just going to help me navigate what I'm doing next in my career. But what they don't realize is,
Hmm.
because of how much time we spend in the office,
Yep.
it's relationship issues, it's what's happening in your family, it's identity crisis, all that is happening in the workspace, but you don't talk about it. Yeah, and so when you come through the safety of an executive coach that's just going to help me with figure out what the next job is, they don't realize I can leverage all of my, therapeutic
Yep.
model on helping them actually burn down those other doors that are kind of been, behind them, of holding them back from getting to the next thing. And so it is a safe, path to get help mentally and emotionally, because you don't realize that you need it until someone starts unlocking some of those pieces through the lens of coaching.
Yes. It's a much more palatable way to get into some of
Totally.
these things for sure. Let's move into some of the science around what you're doing and when high performing people are placed in push to perform environments and their identity gets completely wrapped up into their achievement. What does the science tell us about what happens to the mental health of folks like this?
I mean, it doesn't take a lot of science to watch how people react, and physically or lose their identity the more they perform at high levels. For example, when I left Apple, um, I started feeling very sluggish mentally. I was, just not feeling myself. In about 6 months after I left, I went to my doctor and was like, something's not right. I'm not feeling normal. And, you know, did all the cognitive testing and everything. You're still thinking way beyond the average person. And then he finally gave me my aha moment and said, you know, you've just gone through 22 years of trauma. You've been
Mm,
running at such a high level for 22 years, and your
yep.
body now doesn't know what to do because you've stopped. And that's what you're feeling, is your body is trying to reset after running this engine so fast, so hard, and now you just been a halt. And he's like, it's
Mm,
going to take you about a year for your body
wow.
to just mentally, emotionally reset and figure out what has happened to it. And that was, shocking, scary, and to the point that I was like, what bullet did I dodge? If my body was running like that, what
Mm,
else was happening to the body? And that's where we start seeing a lot more people having heart attacks at younger ages. We see them having substance abuses at many different levels in tech and high performing jobs because they're trying to balance life out because they're revving so high. And the reality is the high performance itself is an addiction.
hmm
If you really think about it, you're performing at such a high level because you're getting some validation. And when you get
hmm
that validation, it feeds you to say, I want more of that. And
Yep.
and so you raise the bar more. And then you get the bonus. Oh, that was a great feeling. Yeah, I want more of that. And it just keeps adding to it that you don't even know that you're chasing it. And and it's this high performance addiction that causes us to crash and burn when someone pivots away from you, when the job doesn't get offered to you, when the your boss leaves and another one comes in and they don't validate you the same way. That's where the letdown comes because you've been so dependent on this validation as your driver versus yourself. Yeah. And that's where we have to really recognize that the body wasn't meant to actually run at such high levels consistently. And we wonder where a lot of these autoimmune diseases come from. Now it's on the rise and it's being connected to stress, not because of past, familial issues, but stress is causing it to trigger because the body doesn't know how to process the overuse of dopamine and all the other things that happen when you're at a high performer. So the body will always win. That's what I always say.
Mm.
At the end of the day, the body will always win. I've gone through burnout and I felt it. And I tell anyone I mentor, anyone I coach, anyone I see in the office is that you will lose the body battle because it is the dominant thing in our life that will say, I need to stop. And so I try and help people monitor so you're constantly going like this versus the ups and downs. Because when you do the ups and downs, it's hard on your body mentally, physically, emotionally. And that's what we try and manage in my practice.
Yeah, I saw always, I don't think they were actually boiling frogs, but the boiling frog metaphor, I think really works for a lot of people that, you know, the frog just sits in the water as the
Hmm.
heat gets cranked up, cranked up, cranked up, cranked up so slowly that they don't realize that they're in boiling water and they die. Versus, if you stepped into that boiling water, you would jump right out because
You
it's
would
way
jump
too
right out.
hot. Yeah, but
Exactly.
you've gotten accustomed to it and your body's stress response has adjusted accordingly to all of a sudden, you're 48 years old and you've got blood pressure through the roof. You don't feel it,
Yes.
but your body is responding. Yep, the body doesn't lie. The other part I wanted to pull out was I just had lunch with somebody the other day. She quoted a book. You probably know it. I can't remember the author, but world famous book called The Four Levels of Happiness. That's what I was thinking of when
Hmm.
you were
Hmm.
talking. Do you remember who the author is?
I
Uh,
don't.
yeah. But
You got to put
level
me on the
one is
spot.
like the very, very, sorry, yeah, the very, very short addictions of
Yes.
taking a shot, smoking a cigarette, like quick dopamine hits, like playing the roulette game or whatever. Woo! It feels really good in the moment, and that wears off really fast.
Hmm.
And we can see how people get into addictive patterns around that because the shoot up feels so good in the moment. And then the next level is the chasing the achievement, whatever that means, money, titles, record times, whatever it is. It lasts a little longer and it has a little bit more oomph to get there, but it's the same
Hmm.
process pretty much. The woo part eventually goes away. And then either you're like, oh, I guess it's over, or you're chasing for the next thing. And then the third level is kind of what your transition was into doing the therapy, which is how do my gifts and talents best serve the world? And that's a different level than
That's
a
a
little more
totally different level.
sustaining. Yeah, and then the last one's just a very spiritual level of, who am I? in the bigger context of all the things. So anyway, I love that reframe and how it fit into your conversation today. And I will figure out who the author is and put the book in the notes in the show notes. So let's focus a little bit now on how to reframe the challenge. So if you are working with a high performer in a push to perform environment, or what would you recommend other mental health providers who are working with high performers to do when it is something that's really important to them and they really do want to succeed? These are not bad things to want. How do you balance all of that with the folks you're working with?
So strangely enough, I typically start with helping high performers acknowledge the small things.
Mm,
They typically are racing so fast because they're chasing the big apple. You know, the big
mm-hmm.
target, the big job description, the big promotion, the big bonus, or it's something very large. And in chasing that, you don't. I think about it as you're going up the mountain, and it's this straight up in your mind, just a straight up climb, and you're chasing it, and you're running, and you're running. But the reality is, the mountain is actually a bunch of short steps to plateaus, the steps and plateaus, steps and
That's right.
plateaus. And so I try and help them see the small successes
Mm,
more than the big, challenge that they're trying to get to. Because when you can focus on the small successes, you get to the plateau and you can actually look out and you can see, wow, I got there. And you can celebrate those moments. And when you're in those moments of celebration, you actually allow yourself to reset instead of just keep going straight up. And that rest, energize, reset, be proud of yourself, and then climb the next step and the plateau, enjoy, set, reset, and keep going. And you'll be surprised how less exhausted you feel
mm.
because you're just not running up the steep hill and feel like you're failing because you're huffing and puffing, type of thing. And you think about it with high performing athletes, they don't go into a gym and train for 8 hours, just lifting weights. They do legs one day and they say, wow, that was a great leg day. Then the next day they do arms and they come back, that was a great arm day. And then they do something else the third day. And they put these small wins together and then they succeed on the field or in the sport at the end. But if you only look at, I got to keep running and running and running, you're actually burnt out and can't even enjoy the end. And so I really try and pull them back to focus on what is the win today? What is the win you're trying to actually get today? I deal with a lot of startup CEOs, and they're burning at both ends of the candle. And the trying to get them to just see, I want you to focus on your top three wins today is hard because they feel that I'm failing if I'm only getting three things in. But when you can accomplish the three most important things, all of a sudden the next day you feel motivated. It's like, all right, now I can knock out the next three things. And it actually, small wins motivate you to actually do
Sure
more
do.
at higher
Yep.
quality. And that was one of those lessons I learned at Apple is that it's not about how much you produce, it's about producing the right things at the right time.
Mm.
And
Well,
you can do
your
that daily.
your metaphor of climbing mountains really resonated with me because I'm in the mountain area, right? And I live at 9,000 feet, and uh, I have, over the course of my life, climbed a few of the 14,000-foot mountains. That's become a little too hard for me as I've gotten older, but I still get up to 13 regularly. And
Nice.
if you don't allow yourself to acclimate, then if you
Yes.
run straight up, some people could do it, but it's exhausting. You'll get very sick. You get headaches,
Yes.
you get nausea, and you just feel your body completely shutting down. It's brain fog. You just have to sit down. You're
Hmm.
totally bonking. But if you allow yourself, a chance to acclimate, like get to somewhere and then rest. I love how you put you're resting, you're celebrating,
Yes.
and you're recalibrating. And those things are really important for whatever actual or metaphorical mountain you're climbing. Because
You're
I know
climbing.
when I climb with my husband, he's much more about the journey. I'm much more of a carrot chasing, let's get to the top and call it good. And he's like, why are we doing this? We're here to look at the wildflowers and the mountain lakes. I'm like, oh, yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's a really great metaphor. So, John, what is one thing you want to make sure no one misses in this conversation?
I think if I had to sum it all up, is step back and see the full picture of your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Think of it as are we have a lot of puzzle pieces in our life. And we typically only focus on one piece, and that's work. But if you step back, you'll be amazed how many pieces of this puzzle you've actually put in and how beautiful the picture can look if you look at all the pieces of the puzzle. Because when you only look at that one piece, it feels very narrow and feels like, am I actually accomplishing much? But you have probably more than amazed yourself if you can step back and see all of you. And that's why I start with just a kid from Akron, Ohio, because when I look at the beginning, it's just a small place in a large world.
Mm.
And now when I see it on my puzzle, it is a very bright spot, but I see all the things I've done around it. Yeah, and that's the part that I have to realize is I am greater than just one piece, and so are you.
I love that. And I love that I'm listening to you say that today, the day after Mother's Day, because I have been brought to tears probably 3 or 4 times since yesterday morning. Yesterday, by the time we're recording it, yesterday was Mother's Day. 3 or 4 times just in my awe and my gratitude of this life that I get to live with these beautiful people, and that, they were all there yesterday, my mom, my 3 adult sons, and how glorious all of that is. And it is such a great thing when you can pull back and look at all the puzzle pieces of the amazing arc of your life, the trials and tribulations, the beautiful people that come in and out. It's really extraordinary. So thank you so much for that reframe and that reclaiming of all the parts of ourselves. John, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? If they want to follow up with you or learn more about your services?
Best way to follow up with me is John Brown at thenextlevel.net. That's my private practice. And I'm always here helping out anybody I can who knocks at the door.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a gift to connect with you, reconnect with you. We actually met, well, I got to hear you speak as a keynote at the Employee Assistance Professional Association's conference back in the Bay Area a while ago. And I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
he sounds like such an interesting human. I can't wait to follow up with him. So thank you for saying yes when I asked. And thank you for the service you give the world.
Well, thank you for having me, Sally. I totally appreciate you and what you're doing for everyone out there through your
Awesome.
work on the podcast and all the other speaking you do.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for our huge team behind the scenes here, helping us pull all this together, for Elias and Chase and Stacy and Dave. And, when you're doing something big, you need a team, and they're an amazing team. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and making this a priority in your day. So in closing, open your heart, challenge your thinking, and take action to save lives. Together, we can restore dignity and sustain a passion for living.